This is Qamar Cheema, and I'm thrilled to have with me Mr. Michael Kugelman from Woodrow Wilson Institute, which is based in Washington, D.C. Thank you very much, Michael, for your time.
Good to be back here with you.
Thank you. So, Michael, you have been, we were just having a discussion that you are an honorary Pakistani and honorary Indian who is just part of South Asia because you keep an eye on South Asia. So, how are you looking things from Washington D.C.? What are the optics for Pakistan right now? Currently, when Imran Khan is in jail, he's going to the courts. The Rangers are going to have him back in jail, maybe. So, what do you make of the situation?
Yeah, well, the optics are certainly about as bad as they could be for Pakistan, and that's bad for a variety of reasons. Pakistan, of course, is always concerned about strengthening its global image, and especially now when it's experiencing severe economic stress. It doesn't want to convey that impression to key donors and foreign investors and international financial institutions that it's a country struggling to keep it together. So yeah, it's just a very troubling moment. And I always try to avoid India-Pakistan comparisons when I can, but I think in this case it's worth drawing the contrast between Pakistan and India. I mean, we know Pakistan is really struggling right now on multiple fronts, and yet across the border in India, you've got one of the fastest growing economies in the world. You've got a country that's chairing the world's very influential club of powerful economies and welcoming all these senior officials from the most powerful countries in the land. So it really is quite a contrast. Not to take away from the major internal issues that India is dealing with right now, particularly in terms of the Hindu nationalist ideology and the impacts that has on so many things. But from a bird's eye view, the contrast between India and Pakistan on so many levels could not be more stark at the moment.
So, Michael, we have seen in the past the Western countries used to interfere a lot, or you to talk about what's going on into the internal affairs of the developing world. For example, just yesterday, Rishi Sunak gave a statement that this is purely internal matter. I think the American government is also considering this is internal matter, where the former prime minister is facing dozens of cases. Do you think that some kind of an approach in the Western world has changed about the developing countries or the developing democracies when such kind of unrest takes place? They consider this an internal issue. Earlier, they were always concerned about the human rights, freedom of assembly, and freedom of information. So, what do you make of this argument?
Well, I think to be quite honest with the Pakistan case, I think that it's not viewed by in the West as a country that's strategically significant enough to warrant the possibility of trying to sort of jump in and meddle and play a role in this current crisis. Not that not that Pakistan is not seen as a strategically significant country. It is, but just in the grand scheme of things, I think that certainly Washington has, in the post Afghanistan withdrawal era, it really has turned its attention away from Pakistan to a great degree. So certainly, Washington, as well as other capitals like London and other key capitals in the West, they're watching with concern the unrest and the instability that has played out in Pakistan in recent days and weeks. But I think at the end of the day, they're just focused on other issues, and they don't feel a need to try to inject themselves into what is obviously a very sensitive and certainly explosive political crisis at the moment. But it's true that the Biden administration is a values-based administration. It has a values-based foreign policy, meaning that it emphasizes the idea of rights and democracy. And obviously, rights and democracy are both very much under the gun in Pakistan right now. But I think that the U.S. in particular is going to be very cautious with its public messaging because the Biden administration was dragged into Pakistan's domestic politics when Khan started wrongly accusing the U.S. of helping overthrow him. So that's another reason why I think we could expect a lot of public caution from U.S. officials, even as they quietly watch with concern what has been playing out.
So, Michael, that's fine what you're saying that the US government is cautious when it talks about Pakistan, particularly when former Prime Minister Imran Khan tried to drag the United States in the internal matters of Pakistan. But how do you see that the US Congress is giving a lot of statements about Pakistan? Just today, I saw that the Foreign Relations Committee, I think Chairman Mr. Mendeza gave a statement about the development. So, why recently the U.S. Congress? This is because there are some Pakistani Americans who are giving sort of an information, or do you believe that the U.S. Congress have such kind of an attitude and they talk about countries when they go through such situations?
Yeah, well, there's several factors at play here, and you're right. This is an important issue. We are seeing a number of very prominent, influential members of Congress issuing statements about the situation in Pakistan. And indeed, I mean, the chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, that's probably, Senator Menendez is probably one of the most influential members of Congress when it comes to foreign policy because of that role that he plays. So, in terms of why we're seeing this interest and messaging from Congress, I don't think there have been any academic studies on this, and there need to be, but I think it's safe to say that Imran Khan is quite popular among the Pakistani American community. I've always thought that at a different time, it was Pervez Musharraf that was interestingly very popular among the diaspora. Going back to when he was in office, and then even after that. But what we've seen over the last decade is that the Khan supporters are extraordinary, and a big reason for that is that PTI has long had a strong presence in the US. And that gets me to the second factor here. PTI has been very active in lobbying. I mean, they actually hired a lobby group to try to patch up the PTI's relations with the United States through working with U.S. media outlets, as well as engaging or trying to reach out to U.S. government officials within the executive branch, but also on Capitol Hill. And I think we're now seeing the fruits of those efforts play out. And so that means that PTI has been very successful. You have places like Houston, as well as the DC area, where you just have very large Pakistani American communities and also very significant presence of uh, leaders of PTI who live here and who also happen to be quite close to Khan, I should say. So I think that, to sum up, you have many Pakistani Americans that are a big fan of Khan and would want to bring attention to the crackdowns against him and his party. And obviously, members of Congress are always going to be listening to their constituents. And so, if you've got a prominent Pakistani American in a constituency and they make a pitch to their member of Congress to focus on this issue, they're going to be likely to do it. Whereas at the same time, the PTI US is making its own efforts, its own outreach to Congress. But final point on this: it's important to distinguish between the role of Congress and the role of the executive branch, right? Congress does not make policy, it does not execute policy. It passes laws, it approves aid requests, but it's obviously the State Department, DOD, the White House, and so on, the executive branch that actually formulates the policy. So we should not think that just because Senator Menendez or Representative Sherman, whoever the case may be, is decrying the state of rights and democracy in Pakistan, that is the official U.S. position. It's important to make that distinction.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So, Michael, what do you make of the Pakistan-US relations in case Imran Khan comes to power, unless he's disqualified?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a very big if if he comes to power. But if he does return, there's several ways of responding to this. I think that the reflexive response is that for so long the U.S. has privileged its relations with the military in Pakistan, even though its official position is that it supports civilian democracy. So that means that it doesn't matter who's in office, including if Khan comes back. The most trusted consequential interlocutor will still be there. So that's one way of responding. Um, you know, and the other issue here is PTI's efforts to patch up relations with Washington. We know that there have been efforts by the PTI membership in the U.S. to meet with members of the administration and folks on Capitol Hill, but also in Pakistan. There's been engagement between PTI and the U.S. Embassy, as you know, I'm sure. So efforts are being made, but I would argue that if you accuse the government, if you accuse the Biden administration of trying to overthrow you, if you make that such an incredibly serious um, explosive charge and it's completely false, which it is, it takes time to get around that. And I would argue that President Biden was not particularly inclined to want to befriend Khan to start with, for a variety of reasons. One being Khan's position toward the war in Afghanistan, and certainly his comment about Afghanistan. Afghanistan unlocking the shackles of slavery when the Taliban came back, all of that. So it would be tough. But I should say that the U.S.-Pakistan relationship from the U.S. side is really driven by the State Department right now, and there are certainly very committed, energetic officials at the State Department that want to make the best of the relationship with Pakistan. They're genuinely interested in looking for new anchors, whether you're talking about trade or climate change cooperation. And I think that that interest would remain in place even if Khan comes back, quite frankly. I think the bigger issue is what would the White House do? What would the NSC think? But I think that it's certainly a downgraded relationship from what it was during the height of the war in Afghanistan. Though it's also a less tense relationship. There's no major crises in the relationship. It's uncertain. It's a bit unmoored, but it's friendly at the moment. So that suggests that there's enough a modicum of trust to allow it to sustain the challenge of having Khan back as prime minister.
So Michael, what do you make of these recent visits of the Afghanistan's foreign minister, Mr. Amr Muttaqi, and Chinese foreign minister in Islamabad? And at the same time, we have seen there is a parallel NSA level dialogue going on where the India is leading that dialogue. So, what do you make of that situation? Do you think that anytime in coming months or year or two, Afghanistan will be this, it will be recognized as a country, or do you think that's a long road for recognition, and particularly this Pakistan's initiative with China and also with Russia and with the Iranians, and then Indian initiative for Afghanistan? So how do you take these two initiatives on Afghanistan? Do you think that that is going to give some kind of recognition to the Afghan government?
Well, I think no country wants to be the first to recognize the Taliban, and that includes Pakistan. And I think Pakistan, reputationally, it suffered by being one of the only three countries to recognize the Taliban in the 90s. So it won't want to be the first. But I do think the fact that that Islamabad invited the Taliban foreign minister to Pakistan. They didn't meet in a third country. They didn't meet in Kabul. They actually brought the Taliban foreign minister to Pakistan. That's very significant because that involved getting some exceptions for the travel ban for him and everything. That's very notable. It's also notable that that meeting, which of course involved the Chinese foreign minister as well, that it happened very soon after a high-level UN summit that convened Afghanistan-focused diplomats from around the world. And at that summit, they lambasted the Taliban for its policies toward women. And they basically, the takeaway from that summit is that there's going to be no recognition of the Taliban anytime soon, if at all. Now, just a few days after that, Pakistan welcomes the Taliban foreign minister to Islamabad for a 4-day visit. I think he spent 4 days there. Right? That's a long time in any case in any context for a bilateral visit. So yeah, I think my own view is that if Pakistan's concerns about security and terrorism are addressed in Afghanistan, if somehow it manages to reach an agreement with the Taliban about how to deal with the TTP, and if the Taliban shows that it is actually doing things, such as, for example, pushing the TTP away from the border, further away from the border, so that Pakistan is not as vulnerable. If Pakistan gets assurances that its security concerns are being addressed by the Taliban, I think at that point you could look to the possibility of Pakistan recognizing the Taliban regime. But again, it won't want to be the first. I think China is in the same boat. That China, like Pakistan, doesn't really care as much about the Taliban's policies toward women. It cares about terrorist groups and the Taliban's ability and willingness to go after terror groups that threaten China and Beijing's, and that involves ISK, Islamic State, but also the ETIM, the group comprised of Uyghur militants. So if China feels those issues are being addressed, then I think it may be willing to look to the possibility of recognizing the Taliban. And again, they wouldn't want to neither would want to do it first. So perhaps there could be some type of collective announcement recognizing the Taliban. Don't think it would happen anytime soon, but we can't rule it out for sure.
Hmm. Michael, so reaching to the last question for today's discussion, what do you make of this Bilawal Bhutto's visit to India in Goa at the SCO Foreign Ministers Conference? Although the Indian Foreign Minister said that he was treated well as a SCO member, but as a representative of Pakistan, he was hit hard, or he was replied. So, do you think that there was no bilateral meeting? Pakistan says that we didn't ask for that. So, do you think that there is some? Do you consider this as sort of a development, or do you think that both India and Pakistan still stand or still hold their positions where they have been blaming each other? So, what do you make of this?
Well, my thinking had been from the start that the Pakistani foreign minister was not going to India to try to pursue reconciliation. That he was going to, take advantage of a useful opportunity to engage closely with a regional organization that actually can be helpful for Pakistan's interests, especially because it's dominated by China, Pakistan's ally, and the SCO is a very much a Central Asian organization with four Central Asian members, and Pakistan is very keen to engage more closely with that region. It wants to ensure that it doesn't lose out with India, which is also trying to strengthen its engagement with Central Asia. There are a lot of natural resources there. So my thinking all along had been that the plan was to basically take advantage of an opportunity. But I have heard from some pretty reputable contacts in recent days that Bhutto Zardari actually was hoping to get some type of breakthrough with India. And if that's true, I can't say whether that's true or not. I don't know. But if that's true, I think that would be very misguided. I think that would be foolish in the sense that this just is not the time, right? There had been that attack in Kashmir not long before Bhutto Zardari arrived. That New Delhi right away seemed to suggest that Pakistan-sponsored militants were behind it. Who knows the true story, but that was a problem right there. And election season is coming in India, and it's not going to want to go out of its way to try to extend an olive branch at a moment when it's would probably want to fall back on that hardline Pakistan stance, which I think has certainly not hurt it in previous election campaigns. And finally, India's government would not want to make a huge amount of outreach to a government as weak and vulnerable and unpopular as the current government in Pakistan, which, assuming all goes to schedule, will be having to go into elections in a few months and could well lose those elections. So I think at the very least, the Indian government would want to wait until there's a new elected government in place in Pakistan. There's something to be said that India would prefer to engage covertly through backhand or back channels with the Pakistani military. So for all those reasons, it wouldn't have made sense for Islamabad to think that by attending this summit in Goa that it could move the needle forward on the relationship. Now, of course, it really didn't work out in the sense that Dr. Jaishankar gave that extremely undiplomatic comment, which is really what resonated the most from that trip, and it's unfortunate. But if Islamabad was not going into that trip with the hopes of improving the relationship with India, then in that case, the trip wasn't a failure. I mean, Bhutto Zardari met with every member of SCO bilaterally except for except for Jaishankar, and he engaged with the meeting. So he achieved what Pakistan should have sought to achieve. Having these bilateral meetings, engaging multilaterally. So ultimately, who knows what Islamabad was really trying to get out of that visit.
Michael, one quick question. Just the Indians have been trying to say since long that Pakistan sponsors are sending militants in Indian occupied Kashmir. Pakistan says we only support diplomatic, politically, and morally. How much Indian stance or Indian position is being globally accepted, and how much Pakistan's reaction globally that we are not sending any kind of militants now or jihadis now is being accepted globally? What do you take or what do you make of the stance of both the countries? How do you gauge and see this?
Yeah, so I mean, Pakistan really has a global image problem, and that by extension, it has a global credibility problem, which means that many governments, countries, and publics too, for that matter, are not willing to give Pakistan the benefit of the doubt, suggesting that if India is accusing Pakistan of sending militants across the border, that there would be a tendency to buy into that position from India. I mean, I will say on the issue of Kashmir, uh, there I think the international community has largely bought into the narrative, and the idea that India wants put out there, that Kashmir is, that it's been normalized, it's peaceful, it's stable. You already have a few countries in the Gulf that are reopening air links and committing to investments in Srinagar and so on. So on Kashmir, I think India has really struggled to capture the international community's support. But on this issue of cross-border militancy, it's a bit more. I think that's something that many, the average news consumer anywhere in the world may not really pay much attention to anyway. But again, I go back to the image problem that there's sort of a tendency to mistrust what Pakistani officials may say. If they say India is maligning us, what they're saying is false. Yeah, I think there may be a tendency to not necessarily believe that such statements are being made. Now, I, as an analyst, someone that studied India and Pakistan for many years, I do think that the uh, the phenomenon of cross-border militancy, of militants going into India-administered Kashmir, that's not happening nearly as much as it used to, especially going back to the 90s. But again, with that trust deficit, that trust gap, that's a challenge for Pakistan in terms of getting its message across to the international community.
Michael, you are right. Sending message across and having this image problem, these are some of the issues Pakistan is facing continuously. And I think that was the reason the military wanted to have Imran Khan as its spokesperson, but somehow things got derailed in between and this entire project got exploded. Thank you very much, Michael, for your time and sharing your thoughts with us.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.